All right. Looks like we should be coming live any moment now. By the way, I am Brian. Thank you for joining me today. We are going straight into an update on Ukraine, so bear with me. I hope the stream started up nice and fast, so you'll get that intro real fast. But let's go ahead and pick up with some of the first information. As soon as you join in, make sure you leave a comment so I can see who's here and make sure that we're getting good audio out there for you to listen to. Let's go ahead and dive right on into it. According to information from Ukraine's Defense Intelligence Agency, Russia has now committed its entire available ground forces to Ukraine invasion. That's about 462,000 combat soldiers. They say that at this point in time, Russia no longer has the capacity to start a conflict anywhere else at this point in time because everything they've got that can actually be committed to a land war is active in Ukraine. Really an interesting thought. I don't know how I feel about it just now. I have reasons to believe this to be accurate, mainly because pretty much at this point in time, in fact, hang on a second, I got to turn off some stuff here. That's not what we're looking at. Mainly because there is real good information that the Russians have been committing everything possible to this war at this time, trying to eke out a success no matter what it takes. And there's a book I read a long time ago. It was a science fiction book, so it was definitely a work of fiction, talking about this a warrior culture that if they retreated now after losing all of this hardware, all this equipment, having lost so many lives, those who retreated at that point would go home to getting their heads chopped off effectively. So they would keep attacking and keep attacking and keep attacking no matter what cost it would require, because otherwise anyone that came back without a flag of victory in this case would definitely end up being killed by the people. They're saying that basically all of Russia's actual manpower that could be used to effectively engage in war is committed in Ukraine. That does not mean that there's not going to be plenty of missiles and stuff like that, and it does not rule out additional mobilizations or additional training of troops. But at this point in time, Russia does not have sufficient capacity to wage a war in another country because they have fully committed everything they have at this point to Ukraine. Then I caught this interesting item. This is surprised me. We'll put it that way. Republicans have developed a victory plan for Ukraine. The Ukraine's victory requires promptly receiving provided critical weaponry, ATACMS, F-16s, air defense systems, and more, intensifying sanctions, and of course transferring the $300 billion of frozen Russian assets to Ukraine. So I looked for this proposed plan of victory, and let me get that link up. In fact, that's why I was hiding that bit of information. This is the link to the proposed plan for victory in Ukraine, produced by the Republican House Foreign Affairs Committee, the House Armed Services Committee, the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. And according to them, this report includes an analysis on why victory for Ukraine and Russia's unprovoked war of aggression in the U.S. is in the U.S. national interest, a rundown of existing accountability measures and detailed descriptions of new accountability measures, and it includes information on the appropriate appropriations for those actions, including a strategy requirement and a cost matching requirement with other donors. It also talks about this not being a blank check, and also calls out the United States for providing less assistance than the European Union is at this point in time. In fact, here it is, a breakdown of critical burden sharing statistics. Let me zoom this in a little bit so you can maybe be able to read it with me here. And that's right here. A breakdown of critical burden sharing statistics, including the latest figures, which illustrate how Europe are paying their fair share, including more than the United States in terms of economic and humanitarian assistance for Ukraine. They also talk about Biden continually delaying providing these needed weapons that have prolonged the war, and examples of where congressional Republicans' pressure forced the administration to transfer those systems to Ukraine. Now, obviously, this is a partisan talking point item here. It's interesting, and it certainly is a change of tone. Hi, Lucille. Glad to have you on board. Thank you. It's a change of tone for Republicans on the Hill. Is this going to be a major change in how things move forward? I don't think so. But overall, just the fact that the Republicans as a whole have put forward this type of information, talking about the threat. Let's get this zoomed in a bit as well. The threat, and really this is something that could come right out of the Reagan era. Appeasing dictators won't work. The Republicans need to fight back against this administration's failing policies vis-a-vis Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, Cuba, and Venezuela. Russia's war of aggression, the largest land invasion in Europe since the Second World War, is eerily reminiscent of Poland of 1939. That's throwing it right back to World War II. The Russians have been talking about how much this is like World War II, where they thought they were the good guys, even though they'd been allied with the bad guys. But the rise of hostilities here is really strikingly similar to the situation right before World War II. And at this point, we actually have an opportunity to stop the next World War before it actually starts. So that's the interesting thing here, the fact that the House has put together this type of information. It also reflects, and this is entirely my opinion here, it reflects an ongoing divide, not just partisan, but within the Republican Party. As the one wing of the party is very much isolationist and very much populist, nationalist, and isolationist, I think is the best way to describe one wing of the party there. And yet there's still the other wing, which wants a strong nation, that wants a secure border, that wants a working economy that works for the people, but also wants to make sure our world is safe by dedicating the relevant resources and abilities and holding up this idea of a credible deterrent ability in Europe that would stop the Russians from being able to move forward. At this point, that deterrent capability has been tremendously damaged by current events. And with that deterrent capability being so badly damaged by the withdrawal from Afghanistan, the lack of robust support for Ukraine, this whole idea of fighting to some kind of a standstill and trying to force a diplomatic solution, all indicates that instead of having a strong Western powers led by the United States that will robustly defend freedom and security throughout the world, you end up in a situation where other nations are taking that role. Will it be another Western power? Is there one that's even capable of fulfilling the role the United States has taken in this world today? I would contend there is not. The other powers in question that could potentially fill that role, the UK, France, they don't have the resources to project world power. No other nation on the earth at this point in time has that type of resources, except China, and potentially, if it was properly managed, Russia. And that's the situation there, in my opinion. So you have two different wings of the Republican Party. This is representative of one of those wings that looks at U.S. power projection and says, this is the way we keep our world safe. That's my opinion, and you can say what you'd like about that. Hi, Jerry. Welcome aboard. Glad to have you here. So the Republicans have put out their peace. They're not their peace, but their plan for victory in Ukraine. And I have not read the whole thing here. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of partisan talking points in here. But overall, there's a lot of good things here that, if they were implemented, could potentially make a big difference to the war in Ukraine in turning the tide and putting Russia right back across their 1991 borders. Yeah, Jerry, I agree with you. If it really is legit, I mean, this is from the House Foreign Affairs website, so it's legit in the sense that the Republicans did put it out. The as far as whether they'll do it or not, that's a whole lot of partisan politics that I'm not going to get into in a Ukraine war video update. So let's go ahead and take that link back off the screen here and move on to the news out of Ukraine. Zelensky made a recent visit to Estonia, and during that visit, he said any pauses in the conflict would help Russia. In fact, the low to mid intensity conflict would be ideal for Russia because it would allow their industry to catch up and then start producing equipment and material at a rate that will let them replenish, not just actually maintain. And so any kind of a pause would just give them a chance to keep that, to make this conflict last longer and be rougher and more difficult to deal with in another year, 2 years, 3 years. Over in northern Ukraine, the Ukrainians have been very effectively making additional fortifications. This construction has increased by more than 63% in recent months. That includes dragon's teeth, barbed wire, trenches, properly refortified positions, the whole 9 yards going in on the northern flank, effectively, of Ukraine, right up against the Russian border. Another missile attack on a hotel in Kharkiv. Let me see. This is from yesterday. Of course, the attack, I believe, was the day before that. These 2 Turkish journalists survived a missile attack on their hotel. They gave the whole report on what happened here. Let me just read their words here. I felt a terrifying explosion, followed by another one. Glass started flying. Glass fragments injured my hand. I immediately rushed outside. I was very worried about my colleague. She was in the adjacent room. It's a bold attack on an ordinary hotel. We always stayed there during business trips. It's almost downtown, and we didn't expect Russians to target it. There were no military personnel there. Her colleague said, I heard a loud explosion, dust rose, and I couldn't see anything. I was in such a state that I hardly understood anything, didn't comprehend what was happening. I felt in a state of shock. Fragments were flying towards me. When I ran outside, I saw my colleague there with a bloody hand. The truth is that Russia has been attacking both locations with journalists, because remember that in the Russian, the way Russians work, a journalist is merely a propagandist with a different name. And they are not targeting military sites. Shockingly enough, if Russia would focus their attacks on the military and the production capability of Ukraine, and did a good job of doing so, likely they could have steamrolled Ukraine over the last several months, in fact, over the last year. But their persistence in attacking things like energy infrastructure, attacking hotels, hospitals, civilian humanitarian aid points, things that are merely to help the people survive, indicates a total Battle of Britain situation there. When Germany went from attacking British airfields to attacking British civilians. If anything, if the Germans had kept it up, they were the British air defense forces. Their air force was basically almost destroyed. When Germany switched from attacking the airfields to attacking the civilians, that actually gave the Brits enough time to build more planes, train more pilots, get more air ability to defend their airspace. If anything, that decision saved Britain. And that's the situation that we're seeing going on in Ukraine right now. Moving on to the news out of Russia. Ukrainian authorities have received the first actual evidence that Russia used North Korean missiles. They've passed that information on to relevant authorities. And this is going back to the January 2nd attacks and the one since then. It's clear that North Korea has been providing those weapons for Russia's use against Ukraine. We've talked a couple of times about the heating situation in Russia right now. They were trying to freeze out Ukraine, but it turned out that Russia was very vulnerable. A lot of their infrastructure was very much old and incapable of dealing with this sudden cold snap. It's so bad that a Russian Navy captain froze to death in his own home. We've seen the videos and the pictures of Russians making bonfires in their yards, whole stairwells covered in thick sheets of ice inside, the people freezing in their homes, temperatures inside that are just barely above freezing. It's a rough time in Russia right now, and they can't even blame Ukraine for it. The Russian governor of Belgorod complained of hard times due to Ukrainian shelling. Seems a little odd how much they'd be complaining, considering the Russians have been giving a hard time to Ukrainians for 2 years now. I guess they don't like it when what they throw out is thrown back at them. According to certain reports, Saratov officials were prohibited from meeting with the population, meaning the populace there, wearing fur coats. This was in order to be closer to the people. The problem with a fur coat is that it indicates a class and that you are an upper class above those people. And so they have said, and I'm going to just read this here, the lifestyle of Saratov officials should demonstrate modesty, simplicity, and restraint. The trend is unsightly jackets, insulated caps, knitted hats. Fur can only serve as decoration and not as a dominant element of outerwear. All this will show unity with the people, or at least closeness with them. The dress code was collectively revealed during yesterday's visit to CHPP2. Overall, there's just saying you have to look more like you are part of the people. And I don't think they're going to pull it off just by getting rid of a few fur coats. A Ukrainian drone fell on an aircraft repair plant in Voronezh region. That's on January 11th. It damaged a workshop and causing the collapse of a small section of roof. 3 square meters would be about 10 square feet. So not that large, but it is does indicate a successful attack on Russian actual aircraft facilities. More information about the ongoing heating issues in Moscow and similar regions. There was an accident at the Podolsk boiler house. In fact, the accident occurred about 3 a.m. Hi, Phil. Glad to have you here. Thanks for joining me. I'm glad to see you here. Anyway, there was an accident that occurred at this boiler room that occurred at 3 a.m., but they didn't put out any documentation on it until 2 p.m. or 11 hours later, indicating they were hoping to hide what happened rather than actually resolve the issue. This is an indication of the situation in Russia. People are afraid to take accountability for actions because accountability for actions usually means somebody gets removed from the food chain. That's the problem here, is that rather than dealing with things on a practical level, they deal with it instead in the authoritarian way that only Russians truly know. One of the pipes that was 50 years old, it was laid back in 1974, this is one of the heating pipes, burst and literally flooded the area with deep water. You can see here, it looks like it's at least several inches deep because you can see it just barely up on the fenders of these cars that are driving nearby. So there have been hospitals and clinics affected. The polonium or tea solution. Well, sometimes you get both in one. So a lot of things were damaged because Russia has not been taking care of their infrastructure. And to be honest, there's a lot of this same issue happening in the United States now, though thankfully we aren't having this type of problems where the corruption is so horrendous. But I'll give you a great example out of the United States, and that would be the flooding after Hurricane Katrina in Baton Rouge. They had a whole group that was a government group that was supposed to handle the levees there. And they had instead been taking that money and pocketing a lot of it, and that resulted in those levees failing at the moment they most needed them. So corruption does happen. Most of the time, it doesn't result in the deaths like that, but overall, they deal with the problem first, then they'll deal with the legal action after. These people in Russia are dealing with the legal action first, and then maybe the problem, they just hope the problem will go away. The situation in Belgorod has gotten so bad, they're actually building block security structures around things like bus stops. So imagine if you wanted to go to the, sit at the bus stop, wait for your bus, you had to sit inside this block structure because there might be drones attacking at any time. That's a situation that we're seeing in Belgorod now, something that they probably didn't think they'd have to deal with because they believed beyond all else that Russia would keep them protected, which turned out to not be true. A radar array, the Voronezh M missile attack warning system, the construction was canceled entirely. It was intended to be installed into Crimea to warn against incoming drones and missiles. But the problem is that the place they were going to install it is already subject to drones and missile strikes, which would mean they believe that even if they managed to get it constructed, that the array would be destroyed nearly immediately should they do so. Get this translated because I can't remember what it was. Oh, yes, Russia's budget deficit. I know as an American, talking about budget deficits is probably one of the least persuasive arguments you could ever have. But Russia used to run a budget surplus right up until they, invaded another sovereign country. Now they have a budget deficit exceeding 3 trillion rubles. That is a lot of cold, hard cash. Russia has been increasing the number of criminals and mercenaries on the front line, now from Africa. They've now captured people from Cape Verde and a Somalian. It's clear that Russia has been using financial incentives to recruit shall we say, shadier element from other parts of the world, including Africa, in order to continue to prosecute this war. They really don't want to have to mobilize their people in Moscow, because as soon as they do, somebody's head's going to roll, and they don't think it's going to be the person that they want to roll. Ukrainian intelligence reported that Russia's efforts to expand their defense industrial base aren't actually yet fulfilling their operational requirements in Ukraine, causing additional munitions shortages and causing them to go to North Korea in order to get enough ammunition to continue their attacks. Obviously, from the West's perspective, we are absolutely providing equipment and weapons and supplies to Ukraine. The fact that Russia initiated this war and then had to ask for help is actually a big black eye for the Kremlin. All right, I'm going to take a brief pause here. Do you guys have any questions for me before I move on to the international information and the most important information of the day, in fact, about the new agreement between the UK and Ukraine? I don't see any so far. So, obviously it takes a minute to formulate a question. So absolutely key it in and let me know in the comments. I'll be watching for it. Let's go ahead and move on to the international front for a little bit here. From the Institute for the Study of War, the Kremlin may be instructing actors in Russian-backed breakaway Republic of Transnistria to set information conditions for a possible false flag operation in Transnistria as part of the wider Kremlin efforts to destabilize Moldova. Moldova is already a little bit shaky right now with the Transnistria situation, and still enough pro-Russia politicians to cause a whole lot of heartache and discontent. They're hoping that if they can fracture the situation in Moldova, it will cause even more splitting of the situation there so that Russia can then take advantage of it. Clearly, it's an ongoing operation, is what it is. I am now wondering if the recent report of a couple of people being detained by Ukraine who tried to swim over the Dniester River. Let me see where the Dniester River is. There's a transboundary river in Eastern Europe where it runs through Ukraine and then through Moldova, finally discharging into the Black Sea. Okay, so right near Ukraine and Moldova. So yeah, they were crossing over from Moldova into Ukraine. So probably from the Transnistria region. So overall, that situation there may be part of the destabilization attempts, trying to create a false flag or a casus belli there to cause even more trouble. Latvia is stepping up to the plate and announced new aid for Kyiv, including artillery, munitions, and helicopters. They will include 155mm ammunition, anti-tank weapons, rockets, grenades, helicopters, drones, communications devices, generators, and other equipment, according to the Latvian president. From the Kyiv Independent, it is hard for Hungarian Prime Minister Orban to back his claims with facts that Ukraine is less prepared now than Hungary when its EU accession talks began in 1998. Actually, on many counts, Ukraine scores better, according to an opinion piece by Timothy Ash. And if you really look at it, Ukraine has been effectively pursuing EU membership for quite some time and has been fast-tracking legislation to do so. So it's absolutely clear that Ukraine is far better positioned than Hungary was back then to join the EU, and yet they still somehow managed to get through the process. Turkey, Romania, and Bulgaria signed a deal on Black Sea mine clearance. That'd be a memorandum of understanding where the three will work together to keep mines out of the shipping lanes and keep grain shipments safe for continued deliveries. Estonia has pledged an additional 1.2 billion euros up to through 2027. That's a major commitment for 1.3 million people. I mean, think about that. That's 1,000 euros per person for the whole thing. I mean, yeah, 1,000. Just had to make sure. From 1.3 million people to get 1.2 billion euros. They're stepping up to the plate because they recognize that their security relies on Russia being stopped as soon as possible in Ukraine. The head of Swedish civil and military defense called on the population to prepare for war. Well, that's because they're concerned that Russia, they didn't directly state it, they're concerned that Russia has been trying to set up some situations over there and attack the whole of the Baltic and Arctic areas up there. So overall, my goal, he said, is to make them think about the situation and their responsibilities, to be prepared in the event of a sudden attack from Russian forces or effectively any other forces that would cause them to go into warfare suddenly and without warning. Of course, they responded by going out buying toilet paper, radios, and gas stoves. So they're kind of like us. At least they didn't clean out they cleaned out the toilet paper, but they didn't clean out the bread, the milk, or the eggs, which is what we always clean out whenever there's a hurricane warning around here. Australia is retiring 45 helicopters from use, and apparently they're intending to just junk them. But the Ukrainian diaspora over there in Australia has said, please send these 45 retired helicopters to Ukraine. Even a retired or worn-out vehicle could be useful, at least until its life is over. If nothing else, for spare parts for others that you might... Sorry about that. Yeah, spare parts for others you might be able to take care of. The European Commission has allocated 126 million euros to boost investments in Romania's ports amid heightened trade flows due to Russia's war against Ukraine. Romania is working on a new highway system that runs all up along near Moldova and all the way up to Ukraine that will make it so they can move grain and imports and exports from Ukraine all the way to Romanian ports without having to worry about Poland or Germany or what's the other one, Serbia. There have been issues with all of them to a certain extent, especially Poland and Serbia. The UK has already had their prime minister visit Ukraine. France is also stepping up and providing a visit later this year. Well, he'll be coming in the next few days, is my understanding. He's going to meet with President Zelensky, and this is to demonstrate France's support for Ukraine. Now let's move into the UK and the big news there. Minister Sunak, this is from earlier today, but the visit has already happened. Prime Minister Sunak visited Kyiv and confirmed a £2.5 billion British military aid package over the next year. That includes £200 million worth of drones, making it the largest package of drones being sent as a military aid package. They also signed a new security cooperation pact. From the Right Honorable Grant Shapps, the MP, he has said that we said our support would be unwavering, and today we've proved it. Putin hoped the West would be distracted by events in the Middle East, but today we've taken the critical step to increase our military support to Ukraine to get them more of what they need to win. The security agreement that has been set up between the UK and Ukraine is an interesting spin on the typical security agreement. It's specifically tailored to expire the moment that Ukraine joins NATO and becomes a NATO partner. In the meantime, they've also announced that £2.5 billion military aid package. That's got this whole agreement, though, spells out a mode of cooperation in the military sphere, maritime security, defense industry, protection of critical infrastructure, and cybersecurity. So the UK and Ukraine are going to be working together on pretty much all aspects of defending Ukraine. Zelensky said, "This is not simply a declaration. This is a reality that will come to fruition as a result of our cooperation, including security commitments from a major global power, the United Kingdom." Interestingly, right before this visit, the visa-free entry for British citizens was extended for another year until January 30th of next year, so they can enter Ukraine without a visa for up to 90 days within a 180-day period. And Sunak was not just sitting there in all the fancy places and, drinking the tea, and not the polonium tea, the regular tea, the diplomatic tea. And he was actually visiting some of the places that were destroyed by Russian aggression here. He visited this building where the 700 people had used to live, but the Russians damaged it and destroyed the building effectively. 4 residents died, 50 were injured, and the hundreds of people who lived in this building were now left homeless. He visited the building, talked with the people, talked with the first responders. It's clear that he's not just there for a photo op, but to understand the true situation that the Ukrainians are going through. And that's the situation on the international front. So we're going to move over to the front lines real quick here. And we got a few things, not as much over the last day and a half, but a few interesting things. The Defense Intelligence Update from the UK talks about a cold snap, of course, that we're experiencing. We're experiencing a bit of a cold snap here, though not as bad, at least not yet, as what's going on over in Ukraine and Russia. They do talk about it, though, from a slightly different perspective. There will be, this will likely freeze the ground and make conditions better for cross-country movement for at least the near future, throughout January and into February before the March thaw. Then there will be, of course, worse conditions for cross-country movement. But this will also increase snow cover, which will be a limiting factor. The overall, while it's not necessarily meaning there's going to be a huge offensive season right now, it does indicate that there are conditions right now that would allow for heavier equipment to be used in the battle to potentially regain some positions. Both sides are going to take advantage of that. Over in Kupiansk area, there was a push by the armed forces of Ukraine near Pershotrev. Wow, that one's a hard one. Pershotreventrevne. Pershotrovnevi. There we go. That's close enough. I didn't practice that one in advance, clearly. They are working on potentially advancing in this area right here. So that's unconfirmed, at least as of yesterday. We'll be watching for more. The situation in Krinky is very difficult for Ukraine. They don't have a robust, the Ukrainians don't have a robust logistics and heavy equipment there to really conduct a further offensive operation. But the Russians have not been able to dislodge the Ukrainians because they've got the artillery there in spades. So every time a Russian vehicle shows its face anywhere in the front line in the Krinky region, they drop a artillery shell, a 155, right on top of it. They put a first-person view drone right in the middle of it. They do everything they can to stop the Russians from advancing in this area, allowing a small group of Ukrainians to maintain that bridgehead. The another map on the situation on the Kupiansk front. Let's see if I can get this a little bit bigger here. Ukraine was able to recapture the heights north of Olyanka, according to this map here. That would be this area right here. And that would be the advance that we talked about in the previous slide. They're kind of confirming this at this point, but we'll see if there's further confirmation later on. According to Kirill Budanov, the biggest constraint on the offensives of the Ukrainians and the Russians is the sheer density of the minefields. On top of that, huge numbers of drones in use mean it's impossible to do a surprise attack. That each side is able to so effectively stop the other from doing an advance at this point in time that that's what stopped both sides from making significant gains last year. Be interesting to see how they break that particular aspect of the stalemate. And it could be a simple matter of having the right technology at the right place at the right time. Ukrainian forces recaptured half a kilometer of territory near Verbova, according to the mayor of Melitopol. Now, this area has been a battleground since August of 2023, and there's been no real breakthrough on either side in this area. They're talking, hold on, let me get the easier to see map up here. Update on the front line west of Verbova. So here we go. Let's see if this is the information they're talking here. Nope, that is not the direction I expected to see it going. The reports are that the Ukrainians had captured some territory, but that looks more like Russians capturing territory to me. So I don't know if that means, let me just take a look at this again, back that up. So this is going to require some clarification later. The deep state map tends to be pretty conservative about what they publish. So I can't take it at face value, but I can say that generally speaking, they're usually pretty good about keeping current on what's going on. Let's go and take a look and see what's going on here. Update front line south of Novomikhailivka. Now this situation over here has been adjusting in several different ways, just basically a larger gray area according to that. Okay. The rest are clarifications. So that's the situation on the front lines. No major changes, no major adjustments to speak of, but overall, the situation remains relatively static, especially as this cold weather is going through and stopping a lot of the offensives that might have taken place. We're going to jump into the extras in just a second here. I'm going to kind of take a moment to clear my throat, though, to keep on going. All right, let's continue on. The Pentagon announced, this is from just this last, over the last 24 hours. The Pentagon announced the start of a military operation against the Houthis in Yemen. Air and missile strikes were carried out on the cities of Hodeidah, Taiz, Sana'a, and Sada. According to the Pentagon, the U.S. and U.K., with the support of Australia, Canada, the Netherlands, and Bahrain, hit drone production centers and weapons depots. So the Houthis over there have been causing a lot of problem with international shipping. They've been absolutely launching surface-to-surface missiles, guided missiles, drones, and everything against totally innocent civilian targets. The U.S. and their allies have finally said enough is enough, and they've started launching Tomahawk missiles. There was a report that a U.S. Nuclear submarine was also involved in firing some of the missiles in this operation, focused on military targets of launching sites, drone production facilities, and military targets. The reports are that Iran and Syria have said they are unconditionally supporting, it says Yemen, but the truth is they're unconditionally supporting the Houthis. The Yemeni government has been almost in exile, only having control of less than half of the country for some time now. And an interesting change, I'm going to say, and the only reason I'm adding this into a Ukraine war item is because the situation in Serbia, I think, is closely related. I think it's another inflection point that Russia's trying to put pressure on to cause a fracturing of the coalition of partners that are assisting Ukraine. The U.S. State Department has made a determination approving a possible foreign military sale to Kosovo of Javelin anti-tank missiles and related equipment for about $75 million. If the Kosovan military has access to Javelin anti-tank missiles, that would indicate that, well, if old Vucic in Serbia decides he really wants to cause trouble over in Kosovo and try and take that area, his tanks are going to get destroyed outright. There's not a whole lot of counters to a Javelin missile even today. At this point in time, if he starts it and these missiles are there, it's going to be the Kosovans who are going to end it. More information coming out of the Red Sea and the Gulf of Oman here. Iran seized an oil tanker that was apparently run by, oh, dang it, I've just forgotten the details. It's basically U.S. affiliated that was regionally seized from Iran some time ago. They'd boarded the ship and have now started taking it to a port. What makes this really interesting is it's not the Iran Revolutionary Guard Corps. It's not like Houthi militants or Somali pirates. It's Iran's Navy itself doing this operation, which indicates it is fully government endorsed and in your face out loud. So this has not been resolved to my knowledge just yet, but interesting. Let me introduce you to a cat. This cat was in Zelenogradsk in Russia and had been living in a local store. Apparently it was a stray, and wandered into the store one day, and the store adopted this cat, made a place for it to sleep, and the whole 9 yards. Well, some rather unjolly souls put on I believe they call it a denunciation against the cat being in the store. So the authorities tried to have the cat removed, and now they're working on an actual. They're working on trying to counter that with a petition and allow this cat to stay in the store. Sort of a Grinch Who Stole Christmas moment, but you know what? A cat is a cat, and it's a cute cat nonetheless. And the Ukrainian military is absolutely still got their sense of humor here. Let's see. How about some Captain Jack Sparrow riding in the back of a pickup truck over in Ukraine? I'm sorry, it just makes me laugh. Seeing a Jack Sparrow equivalent in Ukrainian military uniform riding in the back of a truck like he's in a like in the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie when he's on that little tiny sailboat. Thought that was fun. And we'll end off with this video right here of a dog. Their owner is being taken away in an ambulance, but the dog wants to go with it. So they kick the dog out of the ambulance, manage to get things closed up, and start to drive away. but the dog is having none of it. So he barks at the ambulance, jumps around, actually prevents the ambulance from leaving by getting in front of it, even, and barking at the ambulance until finally the ambulance stops and they welcome the dog in for the ride to the hospital with the dog's owner. And that's your video for today. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm glad you guys were here. I did see somebody asking in one of the other videos, what's happened to Abrams in Ukraine? And let me tell you, I have been researching that. And right now, the Abrams are in training situations in Ukraine. The conditions were not good for a heavy tank like the Abrams to be in. That mud would have bogged one of those Abrams down in a heartbeat. But with the frozen ground, it's possible you could see Abrams active on the front lines in your short order, or they may hold them until after the spring thaw has happened and the roads re-solidify for future operations. So that's what happened to the Abrams. Thank you very much for joining me. And if you do find today's video to be interesting and a good news summary of Ukraine, absolutely hit me with that thumbs up. Share it with somebody who may be wondering what's going on in Ukraine. And so that will help both the channel grow and help me as a creator to be able to know what you guys are happy with around here. You have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video.